Hi guys, it's LoreLord here, and as you can see there's no gameplay in today's video. People who have seen my latest video will know why, but for anyone who hasn't, pretty much the problem is that I need to find an alternative to what was once Upload Studio on the Xbox, and once I do find an alternative, I'll need to figure out how it works. So until then, I'm afraid we are going to have to work with the camera on this here laptop. But hey, at least that means that Vault Boy will be in every video now, on the back shelf there, until I can find an alternative and we can get back to gameplay videos. By the way, yes, I'm fully aware that me simping over a decoration piece was in fact very cringe. You do not need to remind me of that in the comment section. But alas, let's begin with the subject of today's video, the Dwemer. The Dwemer, whose name literally translates to People of the Deep, and have many aliases shown here on the screen, the most common being the dwarves, are a very mysterious race, especially considering how you cannot find any in Skyrim, because they have gone extinct many years ago. Because of this, it only seems right to make a video about the Dwemer, especially the most crucial information, their culture, their history, and most importantly, what happened to them. Let's start with their race. Despite what their most common alias, the dwarves, suggests, the Dwemer were not dwarves, they were actually mer, or elves. This term dwarves actually originates from the giants, who referred to them as that when they first made contact because of their relative size, and the name stuck since. As for the literal translation of their name, People of the Deep, this term is actually accurate, because almost all Dwemer cities and settlements were built underground. And in these cities, settlements and strongholds, which were scattered across Tamriel, but mostly in or around the region of Dwemerith, known today as Morrowind, they built one of the most advanced societies. You see, the Dwemer existed from the Merethic era to the early years of the First era. During this time, while most of the rest of Tamriel was in its very primitive stages, the Dwemer were developing combat-orientated automations and cities with technologically complex defense mechanisms, almost all of which are still operational to this day, despite the disappearance of the Dwemer themselves several eras ago. In fact, their technology was so advanced, and because they were so cocky, that they considered magic to be relatively useless. Now let's go over some notable moments in their history. In the First Era 221, a new mineral was discovered in Blackreach. The Dwemer of Skyrim named this mineral Arthenium, and a pact was formed between the autonomous city-states of the Dwemer in Skyrim, where each city had a role of the production and usage of this mineral. However, it wasn't long until each of the city-states wanted this mineral for themselves, and this led to a civil war known as the Athenium Wars. This war lasted for 3 years, and who was the victor? Answer, it was none of the dwarves, it was actually High King Gelfir of Skyrim. You see, the High King of Skyrim at the time soon realized what was going on within the Dwemer city-states, and wanted to seize the opportunity to invade and conquer each and every one of them. About a century later, however, the Dwemer retook most of their territory in Skyrim, but there's no evidence that after this point they continued their Arthenium project, so it's assumed that it was abandoned. You may be wondering why I am now wearing different clothes and why the camera is at a different angle. That's because it's a new day, and at this specific time of said day, I don't think the lighting is too bad for this angle. But alas, there is now a new event that happens after the Arthenium Wars for the Dwemer. But before I can mention it, I need to actually mention something else that happens prior to it and leads up to it. As we know from the history of Skyrim, during the last years of the Merethic era and the first years of the First era, the Admoran Nords were finally defeating the Snow Elves, who were now on the retreat. In fear of persecution and a de facto genocide, and having nowhere else to hide, many of these Snow Elves sought refuge with the Dwemer. Considering that both the Dwemer and the Snow Elves were mer, the Snow Elves were under the impression that the Dwemer would willingly help their elven brothers, and the Dwemer did in fact give them refuge, but with a price. In order to live peacefully amongst the Dwemer, the Snow Elves were ordered by the Dwemer to eat a toxic fungus that would blind them, and the Snow Elves knew about this effect, but most of them agreed to this deal anyway because they had no other alternative. But what they didn't know was that sometime later, the Dwemer would take advantage of their blinded state and enslave all of them that were with the Dwemer. Generations later, the fungus, which they were forced to continue eating, not only kept them blind, but evolved them into these beasts that we know today as the Falmer. And then, sometime later, began the event that I previously foreshadowed. This event is the War of the Crag, which was an uprising of the Falmer against their Dwemer overlords. And this civil war continued until the disappearance of the Dwemer. Speaking of their disappearance, the last event that I'll talk about is what happened to the Dwemer. And this all started with the War of the First Council. This war, which started sometime during the First Era and ended in the year 700 of the First Era, was a war between the Dwemer and the Chimer, the predecessors of the Dunmer. The reason the war was known as this was because prior to the war, the Chimer and the Dwemer actually had an alliance, which was known as the First Council. And the final battle of this war was the Battle of Red Mountain, which was where the heart of LoreLordYT was. During this battle, the Dwemer's top architect and engineer, Kagranak, created special tools in order to tap into the heart's power, or at least attempt to. And this proved to be the downfall of the Dwemer. After the events that took place within the chamber of which the heart was kept, the Dwemer, all of them, disappeared, with the exception of Yagrum Bagran, who is the only Dwemer who survived, and the reason he did was because he was in oblivion at the time. But alas, the disappearance of the Dwemer was either A, because Kagranak used the tools on the heart and it backfired, or it was the Tribunal who successfully used his tools in order to defeat the Dwemer. Personally, I believe the former to be most likely, because sometime later, the Tribunal themselves attempted to use the heart, and it failed for them as well. Not only did it fail, it caused the entire Chimer race to evolve into the Dunmer. So technically, the misusage of the heart of LoreLordYT caused the extinction of two races. And so that is mostly all there is to say about the Dwemer. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and or found it useful, and I will see you guys in the next video.